You're listening to Unjourneying. I'm Mira Funk, licensed clinical social worker. I thought it might be helpful to share a map of what I see as different stages of the awakening process. In particular, I'm going to outline 5 stages of awakening. And I want to be really clear from the outset that I don't see these as normative in any way whatsoever. So I'm not saying this is the way awakening has to unfold, or this is the way awakening should unfold, or that it does in any kind of absolute sense. This is purely based on my own experience. This is an N of 1. This is just me sharing how it happened for me, in case it might be helpful to anyone else. That's all it is. So the map is not the territory, and I want to be really clear about that from the outset. Like any map, I think any person who's involved in meditation or coaching or therapy usually has some kind of like mental model or map that you're working from. It's usually based on your own experience, and it's also based on what you're seeing anecdotally with your clients. And so I have found that this map was true for me, and that applies to a certain extent to people that come through my practice, and it seems to be helpful for them. But also I'm, totally willing at any moment to completely throw the map out and recognize that people are on their own path and it might not apply to them. So anyway, with that said, as a kind of disclaimer, just framing this in hopefully what sounds like a humble way. Again, not trying to say this is this is the way it is. Just sharing some stages in case it's helpful for people. So for me, in my own path along this awakening journey, and what I have come to call something of an unjourney, is it started. I would say stage 1 was what I would call somatic mindfulness. You could also call this Vipassana, and Vipassana particularly focused on body sensations. So for me, I spent most of my life in states of very deep distraction and dissociation. I think this was definitely correlated with a lot of childhood distress and difficult dynamics growing up. I think it was connected to my health in terms of having Lyme disease, as well as some co-infections and some brain injuries and so forth. And so, at some point in my development, I just realized I was just endlessly just looping in my own mind and just completely lost and just really having a hard time with my executive functioning. I was just a complete mess. And a lot of that was also just disconnecting from my emotions. And I think things really started to change for me when I discovered Vipassana. Of course, I'm using discovered not in the sense of like finding it originally. I just mean for myself, realizing it existed. And really getting into somatic practices. I think for me, I had practiced Zen for many years, for about 15 years, done a lot of just meditation with the breath, but it felt very much like this kind of ping pong ball of just being in my thoughts, then coming to the breath, being in my thoughts, coming to the breath, back and forth. And it still felt very abstracted and dissociated. And something really changed for me when I started to do body scan practices and started to practice in the Goenka style for a certain period of time. And just doing a daily practice of doing the body scan, for a few years, I felt like things really started to change for me, because I started to really get connected to my moment-by-moment physical experience. It wasn't just about the breath. It was about my embodiment, and my embodiment as an emotional being as well. There were so many deep emotions that I had not processed, emotions from childhood, emotions related to a divorce that I had been through, and it was all just buried. It was buried underneath my Zen practice. I was using Zen as a kind of repressive bypass. It was a bypass straight up. Yeah. And actually working with a therapist who was also a Zen teacher really helped. I remember when I was describing to him what I was going through, he said, "It sounds like you're making your mind smaller and smaller and smaller, and we want to be making your mind larger and larger and larger." I didn't really know what he meant at the time, but it just hit me somewhere. And I realized that I had been cutting things out, excluding things, and when I needed to be including things. And so just coming into the body. And that's really so much of what I do with clients to start, is just when you're feeling difficult emotions, starting with, what am I noticing in my body right now? So that for me was an initial kind of stage of awakening, is just shifting from dissociation, disconnection, excessive rumination into presence in the body with the breath, with my sensory experience, and especially noticing emotional energy as physical energy in the body. And then the next stage for me was, after somatic mindfulness or Vipassana, I would describe it as non-duality. And non-duality, in case the term is unfamiliar, I would just define it as, if you look at the word not two, so some kind of collapsing of a sense of separation between two opposites, perceived or constructed opposites. People define this in different ways. I like to just talk about the subject-object duality, as well as the sort of self-other, self-world kind of duality. And these are programs that are kind of running in our brain all the time that create these hard senses of separation and these polarities. And it turns out that you can have a radically different experience of life, of consciousness, by realizing that those are constructs. Those are constructs that can fall away temporarily, and also in a more kind of enduring way, they can like soften and be seen through as constructs. So you have a much more intimate, interconnected experience of your own mind and of your senses. And that for me happened with mushrooms initially, and then was deepened through other psychedelics. And then once I discovered, again, using that term in a relative way for myself, discovered non-duality, I then, started to explore forms of meditation that were more non-dual. And so I started getting interested in practitioners like Michael Taft or La Kelly, for example, who work with these kind of Mahamudra, Dzogchen type practices. And so for me, a combination of various psychedelics, as well as non-duality, open awareness type practices, like really deepened my contact with non-dual awareness. And I was fortunate enough, for whatever reason, to experience a cessation. They often talk about how awakening is an accident, but you can make it more accident prone. I don't know who first coined that phrase, but I've heard Michael Taft use it. I think it's a good one. And yeah, for whatever reason, that's what happened to me. In my case, it was a combination of meditation plus Salvia Divinorum. I remember having my first cessation event on that, and the lights went out and came back on, and then there was some kind of threshold that I crossed. And non-duality, which before that I had felt some contact with it, but sort of in a piecemeal sense. Here and there, various psychedelics had unlocked certain doorways. But after Salvia, it just felt very palpable. It felt very intimate and very obvious just this global interconnectedness of my experience, of all of my senses, just flowing into one sensorium, as they call it. It felt as obvious as just holding up a blanket and just knowing this part of the blanket is connected to this part of the blanket. Salvia really was a great gift for me in that regard. And so yeah, that was the stage for me of non-duality. And I remained in that stage for some years. And I thought, with the hubris of, I don't know, maybe a younger person who just hasn't had enough life experience yet, that I'd kind of arrived. I thought, okay, non-duality, I get this. I was listening to different teachers, reading books, and thinking this is all really resonant and consistent with my experience. And I guess I'm just going to spend the rest of my life just kind of luxuriating and sinking deeper into this hot tub of consciousness in an asymptotic way. And that's it. Non-duality. Check, got it. And that, I felt like my day-to-day experience and my operating system had kind of shifted in that regard. And then things really changed for me, and catapulted me into this third stage of awakening for me. And and by the way, the term awakening too, I sometimes struggle with it. I mean, I use it because it's a common keyword and it's what people are searching for. And so it connects people to the conversation. Because other words might be more obscure, abstruse. But I also kind of struggle with it, because I think sometimes it can have this binary sense of like you're either awake or you're not. And also it's a little bit misleading because it sort of implies that you are shifting from one state of consciousness into a completely different one, like actually waking up from a dream, into ordinary wakefulness. And it's sort of more similar, I would say, to like a lucid dream. It's like you don't leave your experience for some other realm. You still stay here in your ordinary sense gates, but there is some new contact with a kind of vivid presence, a kind of sense of it being dreamlike and spontaneous. And so it's almost more like an increase in lucidity, I would say, necessarily more than waking up. Although certainly there can be an axis of more wakefulness. I would say that was true for me, of just feeling more present, feeling less sort of sleepy or sluggish. So the term definitely has its merits, but I just wanted to name that sometimes language is important, and I think it's important to interrogate and get curious about some of these terms and whether they're the best match. But anyway, I'm going to continue to use it because it has currency now and it's useful. So hopefully useful to people listening. So so this stage, sort of post non-duality for me, things I would say came to kind of a crashing halt when my Lyme disease symptoms like really actively flared up. I didn't know I had Lyme at the time, neurological Lyme. I'm still struggling with that in treatment right now. But the symptoms like really were exacerbated and intensified. And I realized that although the fundamental shift of the non-dual realization that had been catalyzed by that cessation was still intact, it's not like I was unawakened or something. The shift in identity and just day-to-day functioning was there, but I felt like my deeper contact with some of the qualia, you might say, or the phenomenology, the qualities of non-duality, this sense of vividness and interconnectedness, and some of the emotional senses of calm and peace and open-heartedness and things like that were part of that, where it definitely felt compromised. My brain was in such a state of inflammation that there were blockages there. And I felt I remember frustrated in the sense of like I'm almost in grief of like I'm losing something, or I'm losing traction with this non-dual experience, this non-dual genre of experience that I've become accustomed to. And then it just hit me one day when I was meditating that, I've become attached to non-duality, that non-duality, as beautiful and wonderful as it is just another kind of genre of experience, you might say. And it's not sort of, as far as I'm concerned, I don't see any reason to consider it the ultimate experience or the ultimate truth, or that it has the market cornered somehow on just the true nature of experience, the ground of being, terms like this. It is a sort of, what would I say, dimension of qualia that you can unlock that is very profound and very healing. And also, it's not like always online all the time. And like any other thing happening in your experience, it's dependent on biology and on conditions in your brain. And things can disrupt that, right? And so that was a shift for me of realizing that I had become deeply attached to non-duality, and actually it kind of shook me, that experience of going through that neuroinflammation shook me out of that attachment and actually allowed me to drop deeper just into presence with what I actually was feeling. And that was that insight when I was sitting there meditating, because I was feeling just so miserable and my head was on fire. And I remember having the sense of like, I'm struggling to contact the beauty, the majesty, the openness, the vastness, the vividness of non-duality. Where is it? It's not here. The realization is there underneath, but it feels clouded, with all of my brain inflammation. And then I realized that, well, that's my experience. That's my experience right now. So how can I drop the expectation and just connect with it? And so that for me was a shift. And if I could maybe use alternate language to awakening, I would describe this process along this path, however you want to describe it, as sort of a humbling, right? It's like a dropping away of assumptions, a dropping away of expectations, and just coming more and more into my direct experience moment by moment. And I realized that non-duality had become a certain attachment, a certain expectation, a certain assumption, almost like an ontology almost a sort of religion. It's like this is the way. This is the ultimate truth. This is the way things should be. This is the best state to be in. And all of that just fell down like a house of cards. And I just realized, oh, well, this is what's happening now. And now this is what's happening now. And so I feel like that sort of love affair I had with non-duality broke apart and just became a new kind of sense of connectedness to whatever I was feeling, whatever I am feeling. And so instead of feeling like when my Lyme symptoms come in, like a wave in my brain, inflammation, skyrockets, and my head is on fire and I feel terrible. Instead of this feeling of like, oh, I'm departing from, what things should be, which is the non-dual kind of phenomenology, there's more a sense of, oh, and that's what's happening now. And so there's not one that's better than the other. So I think that phase was really helpful for me of just letting go of that attachment. And I never knew what to call this phase. I went through different words in my mind, and for whatever reason, I ended up settling more recently on Metamindfulness is what I ended up calling it. I still don't think that perfectly captures it. But I was very much inspired by chats I had with the Buddhist teacher Kenneth Folk, and I was also inspired by Rob Berbea's work, which some of you may be familiar with, and his sense of ways of looking. And I think they're saying the same thing in different words. Kenneth talks about different lenses that you have in your experience, and Rob talks about the different ways of looking. And so there is this sense that your experience, this I was going to say reality, but it's more like the actuality of your sensory experience isn't at one particular way at any given time. There is these kind of states and different frames that you're constantly shifting through. And if you start to just track them and notice them, you might notice this really interesting, ever-shifting sliding scale where, yes, you might have these sweeping states of non-duality when you're deep in meditation, or maybe just, looking out the window or something like that. And then other times you might be in a highly stressful situation, or you might be, driving and somebody, cuts you off or something like that. And then you might be shifting more into a kind of protective, instinctive, more dualistic kind of frame. And then just kind of noticing that, oh, look at that, look at this, this is what's happening now, this is what's happening now. And so I call it metamindfulness because it's a kind of noting, in the Mahasi Sayadaw sense. And again, I'm echoing Kenneth Folk because he was trained in that tradition. So you're noting not only your sensory experience. So for example, driving, right? So I can note, okay, there's the sensations of my butt in the chair, there's the sensations of my breath, there's the sensations of what I'm seeing. But then there's this other layer of noting what's the frame it's happening in. And perhaps, there might be a moment when I'm just driving in the open road and everything kind of opens up and wow, I'm really driving. And there's a deep non-dual kind of spaciousness here also as the frame and the lens that's happening. And then perhaps there's a moment when, there's a pothole in the car swerves or somebody cuts you off and you react out of your animal body to protect yourself and your passengers. And maybe for a few seconds, things get really hard-edged and they don't feel, kind of soft and dreamlike. Maybe you're just reacting, right? And so that feels relatively more dualistic as the frame. Same sensations, more or less, but there's a different frame in place. So that's to me what metamindfulness is. It's the mindfulness of noticing the sensations and also noting the frames in which that's occurring or through which that's processing. You could say the sort of interpretive schema, that your mind is operating in at any given moment, and not having any, particular attachment to one or the other. Or if you're having an attachment, noticing that, right? Oh, look how I look, how emotionally I'm reacting to preferring that frame over that one. And so that to me felt much lighter and more liberated in a sense than non-duality, because there wasn't some sense of my experience needing to be a particular way. I didn't have as much stake in it. It's just sort of like, well, this is what's happening, right? So that was my practice for some time. This meta mindfulness, as I'm calling it. And then at some point, I started to enter this fourth stage, which is what I call Unjourneying, which of course is also the name of this channel in my practice. And that was very much initiated, I would say, by my work with Salvia Divinorum. Salvia Divinorum is a medicine I'm deeply passionate about. I always, when I mention it now, like to offer disclaimers that I do think it is fairly dangerous. I didn't used to think that because I had so many just really safe experiences with it. And then over time, I did start to notice moments when I would have these near misses. If I were working with it on my own, where I would think to myself, oh my gosh, I was up and about moving and I wasn't aware of my body moving and I could have walked down some stairs and, I really should have a sitter. Or if I don't have a sitter, I need to put all these precautions in place to protect myself. And I have a colleague that I'm really close with who has built a chamber that he calls his portal that's made of wood. It's very sturdy, and that's where he does the Salvia sessions. And I've started to do something similar with a kind of improvised. I have a tent, and I put pillows in there, and I lock myself in. I have this whole kind of protocol, and that just keeps me from leaving the space. Because that's the thing about Salvia is you can kind of sleepwalk on it. It's almost like a lucid sleepwalking. Your body can just do things, and you might not be aware of it. Or you might be aware of it, but you have no control over it, which is pretty uncanny. And so anyway, that's just to say, if you're going to do Salvia, please start low, go slow, have a sitter, be very careful. People have jumped out of windows, no joke. It's some serious stuff. So, but anyway, that said, my experience with Salvia was showing me this deeper deconstruction of the sense of free will than I had experienced before. Of course, within non-duality, part and parcel of that is a nod to spontaneity, right? And a sense of relaxing of doership. So I'm not saying this is anything groundbreaking. So I had experienced that to a certain extent, this kind of more bouncy quality to life, this feeling of like, okay, I'm brushing my teeth and maybe I can feel like the teeth are kind of brushing themselves to a certain extent. Salvia just took that to another level, where it really felt like, as I mentioned earlier, I could be just lucid sleepwalking. I mean, I've had experiences where I've done all sorts of things, like changed clothes, for example, just like walked around, my house and my body was moving, but I had no control over it. I mean, zero control whatsoever. Very, very strange. I was just sort of observing my body doing things. And so those experiences just showed me this level of a kind of deconstruction of doership and free will that I had never experienced before. That was just like very, very deep and initially very uncanny, but then when integrated, it became even just lighter and more sort of mysterious, I guess, and sort of a wonderful, delightful kind of way that feels very bright and very clear. And that, for me, the reason I started to call it Unjourneying is because I realized that I was attached to the hero's journey. Right. So even within Metamindfulness, there is this sense of the practitioner who's doing the mindfulness. And so I sometimes use this metaphor of like the marathon runner, where I felt like, I'm on this long kind of marathon and I'm running and I finally arrived at like the finish line, which is like non-duality. And then, maybe I got attached to the runner's high or whatever. And I'm realizing that there's all these different states of being, but there's still some sense of like, I've been on this kind of struggle, this journey, and I've been the protagonist, the hero, and I've kind of achieved something, that's sort of like this hero's journey. Like I've been through struggles. I've how are you going to say it? Finished the marathon, climbed to the top of the mountain, defeated the dragon, and yeah, it's sort of like the way I can describe it is it's like, okay, you finish the hero's journey. But then Salvia, it's like you look up and you see that there are strings attached to your arms and you're just a marionette. It's kind of how Salvia feels sometimes. It can be very uncanny. There's this feeling of, I'm not actually in control of anything, and I never was, and I didn't do any of this. It was all just happening on its own in some mysterious way that I can't even really describe. And saying all this, I'm not trying to make any claims about free will versus determinism, or that I have some special knowledge about the nature of the universe or causality or anything like that, because I don't know how any of these things work. All I can say is that my experience tells me that free will just doesn't hold up. It doesn't hold up scientifically. It doesn't hold up subjectively. Just if you look at it, it just kind of breaks down. And what's underneath that, I don't know. It feels like something, just spontaneous happening on its own. But we don't know the nature of the universe. I mean, the physicists say we may be living in a 4-dimensional block universe where there is no sort of time in a sense, or time is a spatial dimension, but it's like nothing ever really happens because it's all just part of this block, right? So, nobody knows for sure, but it's just interesting to experience that level of disconnection from the sense of agency. And so that for me is that sort of unjourneying. It's like, I still realize that I had this sense of pride about the hero's journey, And Salvia is starting to kind of work on that and starting to unjourney and unheroize, if I can use that myself, and just humbling me that I don't feel like I'm doing any of this. It's just kind of happening. And yeah, and I think the reason I use this term unjourneying is it has to do with the story of Neem Karoli Baba. So Neem Karoli Baba was Ram Dass's guru, and some of you may know the story of how Ram Dass supposedly gave him some tabs of acid, and it had no effect on him. And the idea being that his mind was already so open that the medicine didn't have any effect because it was just sort of moving through an already open space. And I started to experience something similar with a lot of psychedelics as I started to do different meditation practices and combining them with psychedelics. I was noticing, the psychoactivity of these substances for me is really, really diminishing. And there's less of a sense of being thrown off balance or opened up in some way or even traveling anywhere. It's just more the sense of here, presence, openness. And so again, I'm using the term unjourneying in that sense of deconstructing not only the hero's journey, but also the sense of a psychedelic journey elsewhere. So it's this sense of whether you're meditating, whether you're taking medicine, or just, going about your life, there's a sense of this is just what's happening. It's just the spontaneous presence. And, who can say who's doing it and how it's happening. And, in saying all this, I try carefully not to exaggerate my experience because I don't mean to imply that I don't have a sense of agency or I don't have a sense of, ego or narcissism or pride or any of these things. I feel like my inner experience runs the full gamut of humanity. I feel everything, that any ordinary person would feel. I don't ever expect to not have some kind of ego or pride. It's just I feel like it's a lifelong kind of unlearning process and working through and just coming to terms with these things and our humanity. So that's kind of like where I feel like I'm at right now in terms of this sense of unjourneying. It's this, a deeper relaxing of agency. There's also, I would describe this as like a post-soteriological quality to it. And sorry for these technical terms. I like to use the right term that's in parlance, in other literature so that you can situate the conversation appropriately. But soteriology is the study or the kind of condition of salvation, within religious studies. And, within Buddhism, we would talk about liberation or enlightenment, or in non-duality, we would talk about, awakening. And there is some kind of expectation there, I think, often that's presented in spiritual circles, awakening circles, that you're going to have this realization, this liberation, and then you will be free of suffering. And not only is it soteriology, a kind of liberation, but also there's a teleology, another kind of Greek root that means a sense of a goal, right? So there is this assumption that the goal of practice, spiritual practice, is freedom from suffering. This was really drilled into me when I was, a Zen student for many years. We would do these vows. Sentient beings are numberless. We vow to save them all. So that was really conditioned into me of this is the purpose of practice, is to save yourself and save other beings from suffering. And I think that's an interesting scaffolding that can really help bring a community together and can help kind of organize and give juice to a practice. But I find for me in this unjourneying phase that I just continue to question assumptions and to drop expectations. And I realized kind of like my attachment to non-duality, I did also have this attachment to some kind of personal cash out or a benefit to practice, some expectation that this was going to make me happy, this is going to make my life better. And I realized that too was just bringing a burden, a kind of should, as I sometimes say in therapy, kind of letting go of the shoulds, going back to rational emotive therapy. Anytime you have a burden on your experience, it's going to create a certain sense of heaviness and a certain friction with just what's happening. And so I call this post-soteriological in the unjourneying phase because it actually feels like for so many years, the big attachment to my practice was, I want something for me. I want to be happy. I want to be free. I want to be at peace. And it's actually a huge relief, ironically, to no longer have that be, I feel like, such a primary concern. It's more about just, what's happening right now? And sometimes maybe I do feel peaceful. Sometimes maybe I feel angry. Sometimes maybe I feel triggered or scared or, whatever, jealous or, schadenfreude. I mean, just again, the whole gamut of human emotions, just including all of that and just making that part of the dance and no longer having some kind of assumption that it's going to disappear or go away, or I'm going to have, primarily blissful feelings all the time. It's a relief to let go of that and just to really embrace the full spectrum of my emotions. And for me, that's also a huge part of what is happening with this unjourneying process. Not only does Salvia unlock this dimension of awakening that I would describe as post-soteriological, I would also say there's this element of it that is post-ontological. Again, all these different Greek words. We got your soteriology, your teleology, your ontology. So ontology is the nature of being, and what I mean by post-ontological is I realize more and more throughout this awakening process, again, that there is this dropping of more and more subtle assumptions and expectations. And I realized I was very attached to a certain ontological frame, a certain kind of assumption or presumption, you might say, about the way things are, some kind of underlying sense of reality. What I mean by that is I'm very much a neuroscience geek. I'm very partial to some of these theories now they talk about with predictive processing, this notion that the mind or the brain, you might say, within mind is creating our perceived reality through this kind of predictive processing schema that is hierarchical and that is top down. And so when I'm looking at a particular object, supposedly, even though it feels like maybe I'm taking in some kind of sensory data, like really it's much more of like a top-down set of predictions that the mind is generating. And I realized, even if that's true, if I buy into that, there is some belief I have, some desire I have to believe that there is an underlying material reality, behind the veil of consciousness or beyond the veil of consciousness, that when I'm looking at a tree, even though I can perceive it to be light and dreamlike and know it to be sensation, just all sensation, a kind of simulation or a kind of illusion or a kind of dream, there's some part of me that wants to say, oh, but of course there is a real tree made of atoms, of cellulose and lignin and so forth. That's I can't perceive it directly, but it's there. It's there. There's some comfort I take in that, and when I interact with other people, such as like my wife or my kid, there's some comfort I take in thinking to myself, oh, even though the imagery of them and the sounds of them are these dreamlike appearances in consciousness, I'm still wanting to believe that there is a flesh and blood person who is my wife, who maybe I can't, again, directly contact those atoms in space, but she's there and she has her own brain, and that brain is somehow generating its own subjective experience that I can't access, and I'm not just interacting with a cardboard cutout, in my own reality, stuff like that. It's an ontology, if you buy into predictive processing or representationalism in philosophy, there's some sense of, okay, we are experiencing a kind of simulation. I don't mean like simulation hypothesis, which is another ontology, this is like some computer simulation. I just mean that your brain is sort of running a simulation of what it thinks is there, but still wanting to believe that there is a there, outside of consciousness. And I don't know that that's true. How could I, right? And there's all sorts of different theories about this over the years. I mean, you can look back in Buddhist philosophy and you see there's the Yogacara school, mind only. Maybe it is all mind and there is no such thing as matter. Nobody has resolved these things. These are just theories. But yeah, I think I realized with Salvia that I was subtly attached to some kind of worldview, some kind of sense of wanting a ground of ontology beneath my feet to orient me. And what's so bizarre about Salvia is that it can propel you into these completely alien ontologies. Alien in terms of like other or strange, but also perhaps quite literally, it feels like you're in some alien world. of fractals or other dimensions or things like that. And it can feel totally real. You can totally buy into it, completely convincing, just as convincing as this plane is. And then you can come back in here. And it kind of just leaves this lingering aroma or perfume of like doubt about, what is the nature of reality, of being? And, somebody could take that and go down some philosophical rabbit hole. That's not how it is for me. It just feels like another kind of lightening. Again, think of this awakening process as a gentle unburdening over time of assumptions, of expectations, and, of things we're attached to. And for me, I don't know. It's just really interesting to be interacting with other people and trees and my cat and everything, that's happening in my sensory field. And what's it like to not have some subtle in the background attachment to this desire to believe that, even though it looks like a simulation, it looks like a dream, it is somehow corresponding or, some kind of iconography for something that is like real, made of matter. What's it like to just let go of that? And then, okay, whatever is happening is happening. And to call it an appearance or a dream or a simulation is also, assuming it somehow is correlated with something else. What's it like to just be in the dance of what it is and the mystery of what it is and the unknowing of ontology. So that's why, to put this all together, Salvia for me kind of, has inducted me, I think, into this unjourneying stage of awakening that I would describe as sort of, post-soteriological, post-teleological, post-ontological. So it's not about there being a goal. It's not about liberation. It's not about happiness. It's not about peace. It's not about being free of suffering. It's not about knowing the true nature of reality. It's not about any of those things. It's just about, if I am hard pressed for an answer, I might just say something like, it's just about what's happening right now. Whatever is appearing, whatever is happening. That's the way Kenneth Folk describes it. But I'm actually much more inclined to answer that question almost like a riddle or like a koan. Just say like, what is it about? There's an old saying, I think this comes from the teacher Bill Hamilton, that like whatever you think enlightenment is, it's not that. I think that's a great kind of algorithmic definition because it just keeps you on your toes. Anytime you think, okay, this is what it's about. It's like, is it? I love just, inverting that, like taking a period and then just putting a question mark there. Because what do I know, right? And that's kind of where I land on this, is that I don't know. I don't know, if I'm honest. So Salvia has been really helpful for that. And so if that's the fourth stage, to me, I'm also considering that there is. I started this off by saying 5 stages because hypothetically, I'm imagining that there are more stages and perhaps infinite stages, because who knows what the future of consciousness is. And so I wanted to add that in as well, this final stage, as a kind of theoretical, hypothetical future, because, the last thing I want to do is say, oh, well, there are 4 stages and I'm at stage 4, because that sounds really arrogant, doesn't it? I've arrived. No, but I want to cultivate this sense of just lifelong learning, and that I'm just figuring it out like anybody else. And who knows what the future brings with, brain computer interfaces and AI and quantum computing. I mean, there might be states of consciousness in our future that we haven't even dreamed of yet, So who knows what awakening is going to look like 20, 30, 50 years, 100 years from now. And so, I just wanted to name that and acknowledge that this is not the end, that there is more, certainly. So anyway, that kind of wraps it up in terms of these stages of awakening, in terms of what I've experienced. And I hope this has been helpful for you. And like I said at the beginning, if this is a useful map and you want to situate yourself on it, that's great. If this doesn't map onto your experience at all, don't worry about it. It's not the territory. Feel free to throw it out, make your own map, don't use a map, whatever. So thank you, for listening. And just in conclusion, just want to share a few things. If you like this video, that would really help me out. Feel free to subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to get this channel up to over 1,000 so that I can take the ads off, because right now it has ads on it, and I really want to remove those so that people can just watch this content ad free. So if you could like and subscribe, that would be really great. If you want to rate this with 5 stars on Apple or Spotify, whatever your podcast platform is, that would also be awesome. And if you are interested in connecting with me more or want to work together, feel free to visit my website. That is unjourneying.com. And finally, I would love to welcome you into our Patreon community, which is patreon.com/unjourneying. There are a whole bunch of different levels there that you can explore. And at the lowest level, you can have access to this community through Signal that'll set up where we can continue the conversation, and you can join other like-minded folks to talk about these topics. So I hope to see you there soon. Thanks.